Welcome to the Greater Culture Podcast, where we have conversations about how to elevate the quality of life through movement, nutrition, recovery, and mindset practices. Welcome back to another episode of the Greater Culture Podcast. Your host, Brad Marshall. Today, really excited to be joined by a friend and colleague who I've known for a number of years, Brian Wade. Brian, thanks so much for taking some time to hop on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Brad. I'm excited to be here.
So Brian and I actually go back. We worked together at Fort Bragg when I was just, I would say, cutting my teeth getting into the human performance space. He was the lead there. He was a mentor for me, which was a very awesome time of my life. Brian has gone on to work not only with military personnel, but a variety of populations. He now finds himself as the Chief Performance Officer for Tignum, which we'll dive into what that title means, what he gets a chance to do. But Brian, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and how you came to get excited and dive into the world of human performance and what that's looked like over the years for you.
Yeah. So how I got into human performance was, I grew up just probably like most individuals that, and kids in America, where I played sports and I loved being on teams. I loved being, an athlete. And I was just fascinated by it. And so, one of my earliest dreams of what I wanted to be when I grew up was an athlete. I very quickly realized by the time I was in high school that probably isn't going to pan out into, professional ranks of anything like that. But I still had a desire to just be attached to this, to this population, to this world, because I just love and I'm fascinated and I'm drawn to human beings, competition, and this just pursuit of kind of excellence. I know it sounds really kind of cheesy, that phrase, "a pursuit of excellence," but that really is what it's all about. And I've just always been fascinated by that. I was never big on like the celebrity aspect of it. That's great. That's added. Some athletes become very wealthy, and hey, that's great too. But just this desire for them to like put themselves out there and to do every little thing that they could to try to become the best at their craft, in their sport, at their position on that day was fascinating to me. And so I just knew that I wanted to be a part of that. And then it started to also expand out, and I started to learn more about, how an individual, an average regular human being, can be wanting to do the same thing, right? Wanting to show up and be the best student that they could be, or the best doctor that they could be. And that there was always this pursuit of excellence in individuals if they wanted it. And that's really kind of what got me into it.
Yeah, this desire to figure out what the potential is or what you're capable of drives, I think, so many of us in this profession to study and learn and see what we can gain from it, and then build some of those relationships along the way. So that desire to be involved in human performance, what did your education and training, and how did you go about, acquiring knowledge and experience to work in that field?
Well, it started because, like I said, as I got, I guess, higher and higher or better and better in athletics, I started to realize that there was also this weird thing happening with me, or at least I thought it was weird, where, in practice situations or in practice scenarios, or like out on the blacktop with my buddies playing basketball, I was really good and, like hitting, upwards of like 75, 80% on my shots, like that kind of thing. I was just like, man, Brian can't miss. And then you'd get me in a game. Basketball was one of my primary sports. You'd get me in a game, and all of a sudden I was just bricking everything. And I had this disconnect between my ability with friends and in practice and kind of a non-important environment, and how I performed in an important environment, and one that mattered. And so I just started thinking, like, what is going on with me? Like, this is really weird. And I remember at the time I read an article, probably in like, Sports Illustrated or Slam, or, one of those magazines, and it was about Shaquille O'Neal, who very famously had a massive lifelong, career-long difficulty shooting free throws. And I remember in the article it talked about him going to a mental coach to help him shoot free throws. And that literally blew my mind. I was like, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't even know that that's something that someone could do. And that day, and while I was in high school, it just kind of like piqued my curiosity. And I was like, what is that? I want to learn a little bit more. And so I discovered this world, and it was incredibly small at that time. We're talking, like mid to late 90s. Like that field, our field of sport and performance psychology, was like the most narrow slice of the pie when it came to human performance. But I tried to find everything I could, and I was just fascinated by it. And went into college, majored in psychology, and I got lucky that there happened to be an undergrad teacher there that was a sports psychologist. And so I took her class. It was like Sports Psych 101 or something. Uh, and I latched onto her and like went to a couple sessions that she ran. And I was just enthralled. And I was like, this is amazing. I think this is what I want to do. And so I kind of just chased that. And I've been very fortunate to have the opportunities to, have individuals like that, that kind of gave me a peek behind the curtain early on. And then I was fortunate enough to get into a grad school program specifically around sport and performance psychology, uh, and learn from there. And my friends in that cohort that I went to school with were all absolutely brilliant. And so they pushed me and, made me think about other things. And then I just kept going, and I just kept chasing it because it was fascinating to me that the mental side of things, as you know, and probably many of your listeners, that's really the biggest, inhibitor to individuals performing well is mindset. It's, they get in their own way and they have those unforced errors. And so I wanted to be someone that could help with that because I was that person early on.
Hmm.
And so I didn't have a person like me or a person like you to help me when I was 16, 17, 18. And so I wanted to be able to kind of pay that back.
It's funny how those stories and experiences of either struggle or challenge or not living up to maybe the expectations you have for yourself lead you to want to go figure it out, solve the problem, figure out what the necessary components are to this equation. And for you, that was, hey, let's figure out this mental side of the house. Figured out some mentors and some colleagues and really dove in. I can tell how passionate you are still about the field, which is so cool after so many years. I think one of the things that's interesting is even though mental performance, mental coaching has had sort of this glow up over the last number of years, sometimes it still feels very, ethereal. Like it's just kind of out there. Like, what does it actually mean? What are we actually doing? I'd be curious to get your perspective. Like, how do you either describe what it is that you get a chance to do? Or, if somebody were to come up to you and ask, hey, what is mental performance or what is mindset coaching and training all about? How do you articulate that or how do you describe that to someone?
Wow, that's a really good question. And if I'm honest, Brad, I mean, my quote unquote elevator pitch for mental performance has probably gone through more wardrobe changes than like
Hmm.
Taylor Swift. Like it's ridiculous. Like every probably 6 months, it's like a new kind of definition. It's a new kind of thing. Um, but if I'm backed into a corner and someone says like, what is mental performance? Like, give me an answer now. I would say that it's the understanding, it's the awareness of how your mind operates in pressure situations, in situations that you deem as being very important to you, in those moments that matter more than others. It's understanding how your brain operates, how it can often inhibit you and be a roadblock. And then what are the systems? What are the strategies? What are the little tactics or habits that you have to either break down those barriers that mentally can occur or just navigate, around or through them because they're going to happen anyways, right? Stress is going to happen anyways. Adrenaline's going to happen anyways. So we can't turn those off, right? So we can't break that barrier down, but we can certainly learn how to navigate through it. I can have a system in place. I can give my brain a solution versus just kind of, treading water there. Um, to build on that, right? If someone says, well, what is human performance? Because that's probably a question I get a little bit more than just mental performance. Then it's very similar to that, but it's understanding your brain and your body and all of these different things that add up to a potential deficit, to a potential leak in energy or focus or creativity. Um, it's it's one thing to try to say, oh, well, you just got to have a great mindset, which I think as a sports psychologist, many people will say, let's work on your mindset. We got to get your mindset right. Mentally, you got to be right. Well, guess what? It's hard to have a good mindset. It's hard to be really mentally focused if you didn't sleep well the night before, you're slightly dehydrated, you're underfueled, right? You've been sedentary for a little bit. Like all those things lead to mindset deficits. So human performance is really all of those things, bringing them together so that the brain and the body can be as optimized as possible when it matters.
I think one of the things you spoke to there that definitely resonates with me is this holistic picture to performance, well being, health, where we can go down the rabbit holes of specific silos, mental performance, what you eat, how you sleep, how you move. But it's really a total picture there. And when you spoke about mental performance, just being aware of how the mind works, how you think about situations, how that maybe changes in stressful moments, moments that matter to you, moments you want to do really well in, those are all really pivotal things, but there's other factors that influence it. And it sounds like that's something you've come to understand and know more about throughout your years of experience. So I'd love for you to maybe share a few different either stories or experiences and what you've learned along the way, because you've worked with a variety of populations, from athletics to the military to the highest level of the military, now having an opportunity to work with different corporate folks. So talk to us a little bit about what you've learned over the years of working with all these different populations and how we help them
Yeah.
to perform a little better.
Yeah. So, I mean, early on in my career, I definitely was kind of like a one trick pony, right? It was like, I know sports psychology, I know mindset. So if you come to me, we're going to talk about mindset. And that's still definitely what I bias myself towards for sure. 100%. Um, but it was as I started to basically just learn more about the human being, right? And the human condition, if you will. Because, you know, when you go to grad school, you get the degree in the thing. And so you're an expert in the thing. But the thing is always just a small piece of the puzzle, right? And so the human body is our puzzle. We learned about this area right here, right? And so as I spent more and more time working with the military, I started to realize, gosh, there's so many more things that go into this, right? Like these guys just came back from like a week long field training exercise. They got 4 hours of sleep. Of course, their focus is going to be really low. Like I got to start taking that into consideration and not just talk about the concepts of focus as if it's in a vacuum. Then I left kind of working with Big Army, as they call it, and I worked within special operations. And I was part of a multidisciplinary team where I had a dietitian on one side of me, I had strength coaches on the other side of me, I had physiotherapists over here and an athletic trainer over there. And so there, I started to really see those inner dynamics even more, right? And I would hear the strength coaches talking about, how, a certain movement plan. And I would go, wait a second, like that's actually really great for stimulating focus or for kind of getting, the heart rate up and the arousal rate up, and which is going to help them, be a little bit more spontaneously reactive and things like that. So I started partnering with the strength coaches. Hey, how can we use movement and mindset together? Like, how can we integrate these things? And then I started going over and talking to the dietitian, asking specifically around, like, hey, I know this guy, he's getting ready to go on this deployment. Are there any specific foods you think you could give him that would kind of help with, sustained energy over time? Here's his current diet plan. Are there any foods in specific or supplements that really help with, eye fatigue? Those types of things. I really started to like realize, oh my gosh, there's so many other things that I can kind of mix into this. Um, and then when I transitioned to my current company, Tignum, it just got even larger because my current population that I work with and kind of like my full-time job, if you will, is business professionals. And so many of them, many of them come from athletic or at least competitive type backgrounds, but also a lot of them don't. And so they don't have that performance foundation of what it means to get up early, to train really hard, to have a pursuit, to work in that type of environment. They're very, very smart, but they kind of miss a little bit of that performance culture in their life. And so trying to get them to understand it's not just about memorizing your slide deck, right? It's not just about, making good eye contact. It's all these other things. So those types of instances of trying to teach the whole human body to individuals that are very unfamiliar with the human body and human performance, that's where all those stories started to really weave together. And I think the more you get away from sports, the more you also realize there's so many more complexities that interfere with an individual. An athlete kind of has it nice, right? Like they know their schedule ahead of time. They know when their games are going to be. They also have a team that can help them, get massages, tell them recovery. Here's their diet plans. Their travel is coordinated. They can have that, right? A lot of other individuals, they have stress, they have high consequence jobs, and they don't have that support structure. So they need to be even smarter around it. So that was really the impetus for me learning more about this kind of whole body, holistic, full human approach.
Yeah, it's really fascinating looking at athletics or even the military and a very specific defined performance or outcome they're striving towards. Even say it's very physically demanding, which makes sense why they would want to train the body and the mind to figure that out. And then when you venture into the world of corporate executives or just the day to day for most folks, sometimes it's hard to make some of those connections, like you said, of like, oh, me getting some movement in every day or me eating a certain way will actually help me be more effective, be more present in my meetings, in my presentations, in those pitches that I actually want to do really well, because that is my performance outcome, is to execute, and whether it's sell or whatever that might be. And I think sometimes it's hard for us to kind of put some of those things together, and we kind of just get stuck in the day-to-day minutia of like, oh, got waking up, go to work, spend maybe a little time with my family, but maybe we're not as intentional as we can be with some of our habits or practices. Is that
Yeah.
something that you've seen or try and educate and help folks in your current role on? Is how do we just get to be maybe even just a little more intentional with some of those things that will help your productivity and will help your creativity and will help your focus? Is that some of the things that you've seen in your work now?
Yeah, absolutely. You asked for like a story on your previous question there, but it ties in perfectly to this. So just a quick little kind of microcosm of how you can't just tie intelligence or status or things like that to high performance. This one interaction blew my mind, right? That this individual is probably one of the smartest, if you're talking like IQ and book smart, I guess, one of the smartest individuals I've ever encountered in my life. He had an MD and two PhDs. So he was a triple doctorate, right? So he had a medical doctorate and two PhDs, and he worked for a biomedical company that their goal was to reduce things like dysentery, reduce things like tuberculosis, and like wipe them out. Like that was his company's objective. High pursuit that they're after there. The smartest man I've ever met in my life, when I started talking to him about the effects of not getting enough sleep and how important sleep was, his jaw hit the floor. He knew that sleep was important. He didn't know how important. And this is someone who has a medical doctorate. This is someone that has two PhDs, that works in the biomedical industry. And he did not realize the impact of him sleeping 5 hours a night was actually having on his productivity and how he showed up, exactly like you said. We don't know what we don't know, right? And so you've got to be able to communicate these ideas in ways that are non-judgmental, but also very simple for individuals to understand and for them to go, golly, I could make a small tweak here. I can make a minor adjustment to my morning routine, to my work to home transition, right? To my evening routine, to, all of my transitions. I can make little tiny tweaks and I could show up more focused, more intentional, more creative, more energized. One thing that I notice is we all wear a lot of hats. We wear hats, as the boss, as the colleague, right? As, the subordinate. We wear hats as the project lead, the team lead, as a mom, as a dad, as a husband, as we wear all these hats and we think we have to wear them all at the same time. I think that, one of my goals is let's just get better at wearing one hat at a time and just be really efficient at taking that one off and putting the next one on. Allowing yourself that transition, right? To give yourself, even if it's 60 seconds, what does that look like to really kind of reframe our energy, to reframe ourselves and say, okay, here's who I'm getting ready to be with, and here's who I need to be. And that is much more freeing and energizing throughout a day than just kind of dragging ourselves through it and trying to be the same thing for everybody the whole time.
That intentionality and being presently focused and aware of, hey, this is the moment I'm walking into or I'm in, here's what's being called or asked of me, is such a powerful skill to have, rather than the moment or the environment dictating how you feel, how you think. It's more around, hey, I'm going to go into this moment with the intention of being a certain way, thinking a certain way, and it can be helpful. And I love the story you illustrated there of how sometimes just simple education can make a huge impact, even with people who are really, really smart and at the top of their game. It's something I feel like I'm certainly noticing as well, is that simple is better. There's so much, and we kind of mentioned the idea of the glow up of sports psych, but even within just human wellness and fitness, so many things are like the bright shiny object right now. Like, you need to get in your ice baths and your sauna, and you need to eat a certain way and microdose this, and it just becomes overwhelming and overstimulating that you're like, I don't even know what to do or where to go. So I'm curious if you've seen that in the populations you work with, and do you have sort of a process or a way that you like to work with folks? Because there's probably some low hanging fruit like sleep. There's probably some simple things that people can get into where it's like, we don't have to overhaul and completely change how we live our lives, but maybe we start super small and super simple and see what that does. What have you come to understand or see with that when it comes to human performance?
Yeah. So I would totally agree that uh I've seen it a lot, and I've seen it escalate, especially in the last couple of years. Now, let me be clear, you know, I love that there's more of a focus and so many different podcasts and YouTube people out there, personalities that are talking about sleep more and are talking about, nutrition plans and things. I'm a big fan of Andrew Huberman. I love listening to his podcast. I think he puts out some great information. I've read Peter Attia's most recent book. A lot of the folks that I work with, they are, big fans of those two guys, as well as, a lot of the other individuals that are in that space. But I'll say this: if you take their protocols and you add up all the things that they say to do, you need about 28 hours every day.
Hmm.
And we know there's only
Hmm.
about 4, right? So you got to take it all with that little dose of reality, right? And you got to scale it back, and you got to go, okay, where should I start? Because you can't do it all, right? And so if there were some core things that I would, really look at with the individuals, the first thing is, it's, what are your objectives for the day, right? Like, that's the number one thing, right? Because my objectives on a Saturday are different from my objectives on a Monday or on a Friday. So if it's something where I'm going to be really interacting and engaging with people and I need to be energized, then I've got to start my day with just a little bit of movement. It doesn't need to be exercise. I don't need to do a 45-minute, Peloton or WOD or anything like that. That's great, but sometimes I don't have 45 minutes, but I can still start my day with 5 minutes of something, right? Just to kind of get the brain going. So movement is usually a core part of what I do. And I'm very strategic in saying movement and not saying exercise for a little bit of those reasons I just said. I love exercise. If you're on an exercise plan, I know you're a big exercise CrossFit guy. That's fantastic. But we don't always have 45 minutes within our day. But don't discount the power of getting up and doing some stretching for 2 minutes and the impact that it has on your brain and how it can stimulate better thinking, better focus. So movement's always a big thing with me. I'm just biased towards that. Mindset, like how you see yourself, how you define yourself, that's a place to start. If you don't have a clear idea of who you are or who you're trying to become, why would you be surprised if you get vague results, right? So you got to have a clear kind of idea of who you want to be that day, what would success look like that day, maybe. But just in general, like who are you trying to become in 6 months' time and in 1 year's time? And then sleep is obviously definitely another big kind of core foundational thing, because I think that's probably one of the biggest unforced errors for a lot of individuals. Not enough sleep, or just really disrupted sleep with, frequent wake ups and things like that. Those would be kind of like the three main things. Once you get those things kind of figured out, not nailed, but figured out, then you can start to add on some of the additional Huberman things, or some of the additional Atia things, or Rhonda Patrick, all of these other things. Then you can start adding in some sauna stuff. Then you can start adding in some cold therapy. Then you can start adding in the sunlight and those types of things, which are great and they have fantastic benefits. But you just can't do it all first. You got to start with a little bit of a core and a little bit of a foundation.
I love the idea that there's simple practices or simple behaviors or habits you have that create that foundation. If I'm getting enough sleep, if I'm getting that little bit of movement in and a little bit of mindset stuff, then that at least sets me on a path that hopefully things will go well or be successful. And then if I want to start layering things in, it comes down to, what are my goals? What are my objectives? If I'm just mindlessly engaging in some of these behaviors or some of these practices and they don't really have an outcome that helps me, then it's like, what's the point? Just to sort of check the box. But being really disciplined and thoughtful in some of those foundational pieces, and then moving the needle slowly from there. And the book, you mentioned, that Outlive, currently working through that awesome book, and some fun resources with Andrew Huberman as well, in terms of what are some of the things that we're learning, because I love the research and the studies that are being done on humans to figure out not only how do we just live a little bit longer, but how do we actually add quality to those lives. And I think those might dovetail into one another. And it's something we're really passionate about at Greater Cultures, this idea of how do we improve the quality of life of other people. We have all these practices, we're studying mindset and movement and nutrition and what's really the end game or the end goal. So I always am curious to hear how people think about that concept of quality of life. What does that look like, or what does that mean to you? Like, what's the purpose of doing movement and mindset and things like that to improve quality of life? So be interested to hear from your perspective, how do you sort of think about this concept, or what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think quality of life is the ability to move through life with people and be happy.
Mm,
Like that to me, that's what it's about. I know some people are like, I'm fine. Being alone. I like my solitude, and that's good. I like being alone for a couple hours every day too. But I mean, the quality of life is having people around you, whether that's family or whether that's friends. It's having some type of like a tribe, right? Some group of people around you that you can move through life with, that you can grow with them. Uh, Bonus points, massive bonus points, if those people push you and kind of stimulate your own growth. I think everyone's probably encountered certain friends or even family members in the past that weren't that, and you felt yourself kind of stagnating and kind of getting to a point of like, I don't know if I want to hang out with these people anymore. Like, even if they're family, like they're kind of not holding me back, but they're not pushing me forward. And so I think that's also a key to quality of life. Now, what is doing things like movement and sleep and having mindset, what does that do for me? Well, one, that gives me the ability to have less injuries, have less pain, have more energy, so on and so forth. So I'm just happier in that regard. But then it also empowers me the ability to then push other people, right, and help move them forward, right? I've got two young kids. I want them to see, what it looks like to grow up and be busy and be active and all of that, but still take care of yourself, and to still, be enthusiastic and energetic towards family, and to, be with friends, and to live that type of a lifestyle. So it's a little twofold, right? So again, to directly answer, it's to move through life with people and be happy. And then why I do it, so that I can be happy, but also so that I can be the one to push other people forward.
Hmm. I can start to sense that trend. You mentioned the idea of mentors and colleagues and friends and family, of how important relationships are and how important people are to you, and how they've shaped and developed and helped to sort of cultivate who you are today, and how that guides your idea of quality of life. If I want to be there for these people, and so we can all move through this together and essentially be happy, be fulfilled, feel like you're setting a good example. I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on this idea of happiness, because I think there's a lot of people who are chasing it. And I'm always interested to see what other people's definitions are. I've certainly come to understand it through the lens of mindfulness and a few other different books I've read. But when you think about that idea, so quality of life is moving through life with people and ideally being happy. What does happiness look like for you?
Yeah. Well, I know there's been a lot of, pretty good recent research around like the myth of happiness, or like the
Hmm.
happiness trap, and that like once that fallacy of, if I just get there, if I just have this, then I'll be happy. And of course you get there and you're not, right? I think happiness is centers around a lot of appreciation, right? And so there's also wonderful research on gratitude and appreciation. And so that's obviously a big part of it. Like, are you are you appreciative of what you have? Are you grateful for the things that you've acquired? But I think happiness is also realizing that you have an opportunity to do more. That I don't think if I get to a destination I'll be happy. I think that I'll be happy if I realize there's always room to improve. Because I do
Hmm.
think it would be boring, to get to the finish line and go, all right, now what? And then what? I'm just in like purgatory, like until I die. Like, happiness to me is realizing that I could do more, right? And maybe I have to change everything, but I can still do more. I have the ability. I have, I'm fortunate. I have the health to pursue things and to try new things. That's happiness to me. Like, that I have the opportunity to do more, that I can continue to grow. That's awesome. Like, that is happiness. That combined with the appreciation of how much you have grown, how much you have acquired, whether that's actual material objects, knowledge, people, like family and friends. But that's happiness. You got to be thankful for what you've gotten up to the point, but then you also have to be happy and appreciative of the fact that you can keep going, that you're not done, that there is more out there.
Yeah, I can see how those two concepts tie together really, really seamlessly. This idea of quality of life and happiness, it is in the pursuit. It's in the journey. It's in the unfolding and figuring out and problem solving. One of the things that came to my mind was you were speaking in Ryan Holiday's book, "The Obstacle Is the Way," is this proverb that behind mountains are more mountains. So even if we get to the top of a mountain, great, cool, we're already looking for the next adventure. We're already looking for the next challenge. So that's why embracing that is really helpful and allows us to, rather than just be so focused on a specific destination and what that could make us maybe feel or experience, it's okay, let's learn about the process it takes to get there, the journey. Is that something that you try and impress upon folks you work with? Because I think there's this unique relationship when we start talking about performance, because we are a very performance driven culture. You have to achieve certain quotas, benchmarks, sales goals, things that you are getting measured by, where either you do it or you don't. You win the game, you don't. You get fired, or you keep your job. And we all want to get there. We all want to achieve those outcomes and be successful by that definition. And yet we still come back to this idea that it's about the journey and the process. And how have you kind of married those two ideas of, like, if we can get really focused on the process, hopefully the outcomes will take care of themselves and we achieve the performance we're looking to. I mean, that's why people hire us to come in and help with that. But how have you kind of married those two concepts of process and journey versus outcomes, and what that looks like?
Yeah. Well, I will say it's always tough in our field, because it is hard to measure a lot of what we do, right? if you do try to measure it, it's usually through like self-report type things, which have their own inherent, issues and problems and scoring and validity and stuff. But to answer your question about like process versus outcomes, it usually starts with the conversation of, well, why do you think you're not making as many sales, right?
Mm.
Why do you think you're not closing on certain projects? Why do you think that you or your team are a little bit delayed? Why do you think you have been falling short? And assuming that you can have an honest conversation, and they're not going to just totally blame it on external factors like, oh, well, the customers are lazy
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
supply chain is really slow. Assuming that they can actually go, all right, well, you know what? It's on me, it's on us. You start to get answers of, I'm tired, right? I can't, I don't have good time management, right? I didn't prioritize very well. I couldn't stay focused. I wasn't creative enough. You start to realize that, okay, well, part of the reason why the outcomes are not going the way you want is because your brain and body aren't in a position that are going to help support that, right? If you need energy as you're going through this, intense 6 week cycle or something that you've got coming up, what are you doing to support that besides, you know, drinking a bunch of coffee and, having a bunch of sugary snacks to try to keep yourself awake? Okay, that's where we start. We say, okay, let's get it back down to the fundamentals. What would it look like if at the end of the quarter sales push, you showed up to these meetings 15% more energized, feeling more present to your client? Do you think that would make a difference in how you are perceived? Do you think that would make a difference in the rapport or the trust that you would be able to convey with that individual or with that group? Yes. Okay. Well, then let's now take it one more step back in our backwards planning and go, all right, then what are you doing in the hour or the 30 minutes leading up to that sales meeting to make sure that you have the energy, that you are showing up grounded or present or energized? That's where all of a sudden the process becomes more tangible, because I think, to your point, like, it is hard for people to say, well, what do you mean focus on the process? Because they've all read the bumper sticker, right? That says trust the process, focus on the process, all those things. But if you can't make it tangible, if you can't make it actionable, then it's still just a concept. It's still just this idea that's out there versus, well, my process is I'm going to show up as focused and as present as I can be, because I know that that's going to help me be a better contributor to my team. And we're going to be able to solve that problem. The reason why we didn't solve it in the past is I showed up, underfueled, exhausted, sleep deprived. Of course, my brain's not working. Of course, I'm not going to be able to, be creative or solve a problem. So to me, if you can get individuals to understand or make the process tangible and actionable, then it's a lot easier for them to understand and to really trust the process.
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind with what you said there is if there's a way to put specific data points to these things we're working on. The time, and this was a recent conversation we had here, the time to engage in, physical exercise is not when it's time to lift whatever you're being asked to do. It's the build up to that moment. So engaging in the practices or habits, that process gives us a better chance in the moment of being able to execute the way we'd like, and putting data points to that, whether it's your overall health and wellness of blood pressure and resting heart rate, or certain strength metrics. When you start looking at the mental side of the house, how do we put some data points around your focus, your attention, your energy? And the time to engage in the practice isn't when you're about to walk into that finalist presentation and you've got to deliver. The time is all of the weeks leading up to that. So if we really want the numbers and the data to go in our favor, it's the little pieces along the way that help us to get there. And that's, I think, where it becomes really tough with buy-in. And this is something I'd be curious to hear from you of, when we think about this idea of psychology, I'd like to think that part of our role is this idea of behavior change, because what we're asking people to do is take whatever way that they've either been living or been engaging with the world and tweak it and just try something different. See if something else works for you. And that's really hard for people. Saying, hey, sleep 6 hours a night, Sounds good. Sleep 8 hours a night. All right, even better. How do I actually do that? What have you come to see when it comes to this idea of behavior change or getting people to make those small tweaks? 'Cause I think we know the information, we can hear it, we can read it, we can see it everywhere. But gosh darn if we don't actually do what is, being put in front of us.
Yeah. So to kind of answer this, I'll kind of reference something that I picked up from the co-founder of my company, Scott Pelton, and he kind of shared with me this idea, and it's something that we talk about a lot with our clients, and it's like this concept of discipline versus choices, right? And so
Mhm.
at the start, dis, you know, behavior change is always thought of that you need a lot of discipline, and you've got to be the one to, like, crack the whip when you get out of bed to do certain things, so on and so forth. But we know discipline, that's a quick path to just flaming out and not doing it at all, right? And discipline is also has a pretty high connection with guilt, right? Like, if you think about what emotion is most closely linked to discipline, it's not enthusiasm, it's not fun, it's not enjoyment, it's not happiness, it's not content, it's guilt, right? So,
Mm.
like, that's a really big factor there. So I want to try to stay away from discipline because I don't want my folks to feel guilt if they happen to not do something that day, right? So Scott Pelton, like I said, the co-founder of my company, um, he always shares this anecdote when he's with a group of people, and he says, like, how many of you woke up this morning and started your day with a cup of coffee? And 90% of the hands go up. And he says, how many of you woke up yesterday and started your day with a cup of coffee? Same hands go up. How many of you think you're going to wake up tomorrow and start your day with a cup of coffee? And same hands go up. And everyone's starting to laugh because they're starting to kind of figure out where he's going at this point. And he goes, so is that discipline? Like, are you guys waking up, cracking the whip, slapping yourself in the face, pumping yourself up to go brew a cup of coffee? No, no one in the room is using discipline for coffee, right? You changed your behavior at some point in your life to start your morning with coffee. It started because you made a choice, and that choice was focused on benefits. Now, that benefit might have been that you just like holding something warm and it's kind of cozy and it helps you, just feel relaxed in the morning. Maybe that was the benefit. Maybe the benefit was that that has caffeine in it and it's going to give me extra energy, and I need that to kind of boost my morning. But either way, you started drinking coffee because there was a benefit associated with it and you chose to do it. So it's a little bit of a long story, but it's always a fun one, and I like sharing it because that's how you initiate behavior change. You get the individuals to say, what would be the benefits if I started doing this? So if I'm coaching an individual, let's say I'm coaching an executive, and they're one of the classic folks that have back to back to back meetings, with, like, maybe a minute or 2 minutes of time in between each meeting, right? They might think at the start, well, I don't know if I have the discipline to get up and do some quick movements, or to get up and grab a particular snack, that you tell me to grab because it helps brain performance. I don't have the discipline to do that. It's like, okay, well, here are the benefits of just getting up and doing 2 minutes of, like, some maybe light stretching, or the benefits of doing 2 minutes of, like, some, high intensity interval stuff, just real quick. Here's the impact that it has on, improving blood flow, improving oxygen flow, right? And just kind of re-stimulating the brain, and all of those things. So you tell me now, if in 2 minutes time, right, would you rather have these benefits over here of getting the blood pumping, getting the oxygen flowing, right, improving brain function, kind of re-stimulating yourself, boosting creativity, or you can choose to sit in your chair and do nothing and just kind of keep doing the same thing, and your benefits are basically zero? Which one would you choose? And they're like, well, I would choose those benefits. Okay, then that's what you need to focus on, not the discipline to do it, but you think, all I got to do is do this 2 minutes of movement and I can get these benefits. That's a no-brainer now. So I always just try to scale it back down to the I guess the bare roots of what are the benefits of the behavior that you get right now, or maybe in 20 or 30 minutes time. But what are the benefits you're going to get, right? Focus on the benefits, and it makes that choice to do it so much easier And now there is an emotion tied to it of anticipation and enjoyment, excitement, right? A little bit of gratitude, appreciation that you did it. And then you get a little bit of that dopamine hit because you realize I did something right. I did something good for me. I'm on the right path. So you also start to get a little bit of a reward mechanism there. So focusing on the benefits versus just trying to think of it as discipline is really the number one key for behavior change.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to take that with me. I like tying into an outcome or something that we want to enjoy or experience, because one of the ways I've heard about behavior change is this idea of pain is usually the greatest motivator of like, I don't want to feel a certain way or I don't want to experience that again. So that's why I'm going to do the thing. And maybe that gets us going on the track. But this idea of if we want to have sustained, prolonged behaviors and habits, let's tie them to something we enjoy, something that brings us happiness, something that, elicits a certain response that's going to be for our benefit. So I love that perspective of the choice. Are we present and aware that I get the choice and I know I'm going to experience some benefits? It's going to be something that I look forward to, and that can keep us on the path. Well, we've
Mhm.
certainly chatted about so many awesome topics, and I'm really grateful for you sharing some of your experiences, what you've come to know, how you've impacted people's lives in the military, now in the corporate world. So, for anyone out there who's maybe interested in connecting or hearing more of what you have to say, are there other ways that folks can get connected with you?
Yeah, so I've kind of scaled back a little bit on my social media. I don't really do it a whole lot anymore, as I'm sure you've probably seen. I used to post, and then it's just not that important to me anymore. But I'm on LinkedIn. I think that's probably the one social media that I'm moderately active in. So you can always just kind of send me a message there, connect on there. And then if you do like show notes or something, I'm happy to kind of just share personal email as well, and folks can send me a message that way. But yeah, I hope I've impacted people's lives. I hope that I've helped other people. I don't know if I have, but I'll just keep working until I know for sure that I have. Yeah.
I agree on the path together there. So Brian, thanks so much for spending some time chatting today. Great to catch up, hear what you've been up to, and hear some of the ways in which you've come to understand the world of human performance and how we help people just to get a little bit better and improve their quality of life.
All right. Thank you, Brad. Good seeing you again. Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah.